Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome so many of you to this, the very first of NCW's online debate series. I'm Gilly Rogers, NCW President, and I'm really excited to launch this new initiative. Now, the aim of these debates is to open up issues that affect us all as women. It's an opportunity to explore topics, to learn about issues, and to share ideas with others in a safe space and in confidence. Today's event aims to shed light on the safety concerns faced by women in public work and to provide a platform for us to discuss the challenges we face. Here at NCW, we believe it's crucial to discuss strategies for dealing with safety and to work towards creating a safer working environment for all women. I'm delighted that the debate will be led by Jackie Taylor and Lucy Caldicott, who will both draw on their own experiences to trigger debate. And I'd just like to introduce Jackie and Lucy to you. Jackie is a member of NCW. She has professional experience as both a nurse and a social worker. She was the first African Caribbean councillor to be elected in Sandwell, where she has held various roles, including Vice Chair of Children's Services and Equality and Diversity Champion. She's currently Chair of Economy, Skills, Transport and Environmental Scrutiny. And it was actually Jackie's inspiration to tackle this vital topic on women's safety in public life as the subject for our very first online debate. Lucy Caldicott is a charity leader and campaigner working to address issues of inequality, injustice and exclusion through her consultancy Change Out. She's held senior leadership positions at Young Lives versus Cancer, VSO, and at the youth leadership charity Uprising. Lucy was a Labour councillor in the London Borough of Lambeth and led on health and adult social care. She's recently taken up the role of Director of Policy for Richard Parker's West Midland mayoral campaign. So I'm sure you'll agree that both Lucy and Jackie have a wealth of experience in public life that I'm sure we can all learn from and debate. Over to you.
Wow, Gilly, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I am fascinated by all things politics, and indeed, this evening's discussion is with regards to women, public life and their safety. So I think it's fair of me to actually put on record that I would first like to say that I acknowledge the difficulties that male public servants endure throughout their line of their duty. It wasn't that long ago when we saw the murder of Sir David Amos, who served as an MP from 1997 to 2021, when he was murdered as he conducted his surgery. But for the purpose of this evening's discussion, we will be focusing on women for obvious reasons. And in order to do so, it would be remiss of me not to go back in history, the suffragettes. Emily Wilding Davison, the 11th of October, 1872 to the 8th of June, 1913. She was an English suffragette who fought for the votes for women in Britain in the early 20th century, a member of the Women's Social and Political Union and activist for her cause. She was arrested on 9 occasions, went on hunger strikes 7 times, and was force-fed on some 49 occasions. She died after being hit by King George V's horse at the 1930 Derby, when she walked onto the track during the race. I'd like to just read you a letter that Miss Davison received some 3 days before her death. This letter says, "I am glad to hear you are in hospital. I hope you suffer torture until you die, you idiot. I consider you are a person unworthy in this world, considering what you have done. I should like to take the opportunity, I should like the opportunity of starving and beating you to a pulp, you cat. I hope you live in torture a few years as an example to your confederation. Why don't your people find an asylum for you? And it's signed, yours, an Englishman. Nancy Astor, November 1990 to the 18th of June 1945. She had no connection with the suffragette movements, and in fact, she was arguably the first woman to enter Parliament. And every time she went into Parliament, she was jeered and jostled, and everything that she had to say was dimmed by all the men that were in Parliament. And of course, we had Margaret Thatcher, who endured the Brighton bombing, and she survived that bombing. 5 people died, and of course, that bombing was not just to kill her, it was to kill the whole of her cabinet. We've had Jo Cox, who was stabbed multiple times and shot on her way to conduct her surgery. We'll just pause there and just think about that. Women who were politicians and came into politics to do good, having to endure all of that. Having to be mindful of our physical spaces. The thing is, MPs, like councillors, have increasingly become the target of abuse. And some women politicians say that they are bearing the brunt of this abuse. Labour MP Rachel Reeves, who has written a history of women in Parliament, recalls and talks about Nancy Astor. In recent years, there has been death threats, rape threats, threats to our families, and this is a daily occurrence. This isn't just to do with high-profile politicians. As I say, this is to do with councillors as well. And I will come on to my experiences later. These occurrences of vile abuse have also made it the fact that a lot of these women have actually left Parliament, and that has on a knock-on effect as to women coming into Parliament and coming into public service. With female MPs citing the clear impact on their families and their abuse, they've had to change the way that they live. Liberal Democrat MP Heidi Allen stepped down due to the abuse that she faced. This was at the time of Brexit, where a gentleman was sending fake emails and was imprisoned for 42 weeks. And that was to do with the contents, the vile contents of his emails. Andrew Jenkins raised the same issue in Parliament some time ago. She actually left the Conservative Party, and she actually left Parliament and left her post, as well as Miss Allen. Where did I get up to? Let's get back to here. But the thing is, how do we deal with this abuse? Because we get people like Diane Abbott, who was a Labour MP. She was the first Black Labour MP representing Hackney. And actually, Diane Abbott was an MP that was getting possibly half of the abuse online in comparison to all of her peers at the time. Absolutely vile. And in some respects, most of that abuse was seen by her staff, not necessarily by her. And then I come to myself, and I can tell you now, I've become very aware of I became very aware of my safety from the age of 17. So these issues for me happened many, many years ago. And because we're in a confidential space, I will tell you what that abuse, that physical abuse was. So I was walking in Aston, which is in a part of West Midlands. It's actually in Birmingham. And it was on a match day, and Aston Villa was actually playing. I remember it was a beautiful day, and I was actually just walking down the road. I was going to a family member's house. And I remember a group of men passing me, and they were jeering and having a laugh amongst themselves. And they walked past me, and soon after, a brick went flying past my head. And I do remember on that day actually making a pledge to myself to keep myself safe in public spaces. 10 years ago, when I was elected the first Black female MP in Sandwell, I certainly cannot share the fact that I've got the abuse that Diane Abbott has got, but I certainly have received abuse. And I'm very aware that as a counsellor who has to go and do home visits, who has to go and do our surgeries, you know, and who has to actually function in this, what can be a very hostile environment, I have put things in place to keep myself safe. First of all, my physical. So I always present as a confident individual, regardless how I'm feeling. I do my surgeries in a public space and an open space, and I always have somebody with me at my surgeries. Wherever I travel to, people know where I'm going. I give an estimate time of return. I have certain people that will make contact with me via my phone, and I actually have two phones, so if they can't get me on one, they can get me on another phone to check in how I am. I have code. So when these people are checking in how I am, there's a code that I use to allow them to know that I'm safe. I will also have people waiting for me. So I have different people, depending on where I'm going, that are actually stationed, a bit like the police really, waiting outside the buildings. And so, you know, for the rest of this evening, I'm open to questions, and I hope that gives you some kind of idea what politicians, female politicians, have to go through. I'm now going to hand over to Lucy, if that's okay. Thank you. Lucy.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you for sharing your personal experiences. I think it's important to acknowledge that for all that safety issues affect white women, Black women are affected kind of worse because of the aspects of racism that also intersect with gender. So thank you for sharing your experiences, Jackie. I also wanted to thank you for reminding us of the women in the past in public life who kind of forced open the doors that we now walk through. And I think it's true to say that no matter what colour of kind of politician you are, what political party you are from, we all as women share some of these experiences. So I know there's a lot of cross-party work that goes on in the House of Parliament on safety and safeguarding of women politicians, and also in the local government association as well, supporting councillors. So a bit of background about me. I wanted to reflect on the fact that when I use the words public life, I suppose I kind of open out that terminology to not only encompass people who are kind of in political public life that you might expect to be called public life, but also kind of anybody in public space. So kind of anybody really. And I spent a lot of my career before I came into frontline politics in the charity sector. And so to me, that's as much public life as politics. And some of my experiences date back to those jobs. And when I worked in charity leadership, in some of my jobs, I had a really large staff team So when I worked for the children's cancer charity Young Lives versus Cancer, I had about 100 staff members and also managed 27 charity shops. So we had about 500 volunteers across all the shops. And a lot of most of the people in those teams were female, and a lot of them were quite young female staff members. And when you work in fundraising, or when you run a charity shop and you do, you're sort of opening a shop, and you might not have any, you might be opening it on your own or closing it on your own, or you might be running a charity event, you might be doing that in the evening, you might be the only staff member there. And I remember always being very conscious of making sure I kept sort of designed things as far as I possibly could to keep people safe. So some of those things that Jackie referred to then about make sure people know where you're going, make sure you're accompanied if possible, if you're, and we put in place lone working arrangements. But what I was reflected on at that time was that because we were a children's charity, and I was working there not long after baby Peter was murdered. So there was a lot that was going on in the world of social work and social care in terms of safeguarding at that time. And we were sort of, as a charity, implementing lots of safeguarding procedures, but we didn't necessarily remember that we should be applying those safeguarding procedures to our own staff members, who are also, if you're a young person, and some of our young fundraisers were, young teenagers and so on. So I think so that's something that I've always reflected on, is also, thinking about all of the people that you making sure you're putting in place safety measures. And the other thing in the world of sort of both charities and politics is to think about power dynamics. And so with charity fundraising, you're often asking people for money, and who are the people that have got money? Well, they've also got power, and so you have to sort of think about that in your kind of interactions with people. So it's kind of a largely young female workforce with a large, asking for money or working in events with a largely male, older, wealthy demographic. So that power imbalance is I think something to kind of just bear in mind. And then I kind of came into politics, which is all about power. And there's a really interesting kind of dichotomy for me, where you're, an elected councillor advocating on behalf of others who might have less power, and you want to help them, but they can sometimes be quite badly behaved. So you're trying to, so there are instances where you might be, so Jackie mentioned some of the roles, that she's done, where you're, chairing a meeting, you're chairing a committee meeting. So in a sense, you've got the power because you're in the chair. But then what happens if the public are shouting because they disagree with what you're talking about? And so how do you manage that sort of, manage that safely? And I've been in instances in full council meetings where behaviour has been so bad from the public that the meeting has had to be closed down and moved into a private room. So that is, and that's really, difficult. In fact, I was thinking about this earlier, and I remember just at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool in October, I was actually on the stage when Keir Starmer had the glitter. I was about 10 feet away from him, and there was 30 seconds of heart-stopping moment when that happened. So but at the same time, what pulls against things about being in private and not allowing the public is that we have to build trust. Trust in politicians is at an all-time low. So we have to be visible, and we have to talk to people, and we have to listen to them. But in an instant, where you've had members of parliament being murdered, and so there's always this sort of tension, I think, between those things. And I just I also wanted just to refer, in legislation terms, the Health and Safety at Work Act, so going back to my points about safeguarding, does lay down wide-ranging duties on employers to kind of, make sure that the premises are safe and their employees are safe. So I think there's not just what the person can do, and Jackie talks about her own actions in terms of keeping herself safe, but also what the employer or the environment should do to make sure that that is that, you know, that her well-being is being thought about in the ways of working. So exactly things like doing counsellor surgeries. So when I was a counsellor in Lambeth, I used to do a counsellor surgery in a community centre, but I used to use a little kind of interview room, a little tiny room. And so anybody could come into that room and be in there behind a closed door. And I often sort of thought, you know, doesn't feel very safe, you know, and obviously I'm not a counsellor now, but, you know, Jackie's got some really good ideas there about doing it in a public open space, so you're visible. So also, of course, now we're in Zoom world post-pandemic, you can do your counsellor surgeries remotely, so that's another option. And I also one of the other things I wanted to kind of reflect on is that I don't want people to feel put off entering public life, because the thing that really worries me about the state of kind of public discourse, and I have to say I feel like it's just getting worse and worse as you see the kind of behaviours online, or the behaviours you know, the people sort of shouting and so on in meetings and things. So I don't, you know, how do we stop people being put off? You know, I'd really like to have a conversation about that with you all, because, you know, all of us should be being public and being engaging in our communities, or in, you know, local politics or whatever. You know, what can we do to change the system? How do we when there's conflict about differences of opinion, how do we exchange views respectfully and learn from each other rather than screaming at each other? And I do think that, you know, I'd really like to find ways to kind of get to a more civil way of kind of having discourse about political, you know, anything really, but particularly political views. And that was kind of really what I wanted to say. I mean, I suppose it's kind of, you know, for me, there's sort of the actions we can take ourselves, but there's also how can we all work together to support each other, listen to things, you know, terrible experiences that Jackie just shared with us. How can we make a society that is safe for everybody, and where everybody feels that they can contribute and share their views and be, you know, lead a full part of public life. So